you remember our last history moment on the 150th anniversary of Golden Gate Park, then you remember we stopped here at the Japanese Tea Garden. Now this is the oldest public Japanese garden in North America, and I'm super excited to announce that we're getting insider access from Gardener Captain Steven Pitsenbarger. So buckle up, because we're going inside for this episode of Western Neighborhoods Project History Moment, brought to you by Joey Yee. So the garden dates back to the 1894 Midwinter Fair, and it was built as the Japanese village concession by a man named George Turner Marsh. He was Australian, an importer and exporter of Japanese art and antiquities, and he's the founder of the Richmond district. His house is one of the biggest in the neighborhoods, and he named it for a town in his country, Australia, Richmond. At the end of the fair, a successful entrepreneur, restaurateur, businessman, and landscape designer named Makoto Hagiwara was installed as manager of the Japanese tea garden. He built a home here for himself and his extended family in 1910, and he slowly expanded the acreage of the grounds, importing art and statuary and birds and fish into the gardens. Let's bring Steven back to show you some of the original features from the Midwinter Fair and some other parts of the tea garden that connect with the Hagiwara era.
So where I'm standing right here is kind of at the center of what the original garden was. The original garden was about an acre in size, and this site was actually selected because of the topography and because of the beautiful pines that you see above our head. These pines predate the garden. They were here, planted probably in the 1870s, and now have the twisted shapes because they've been pruned for more than 100 years. There isn't much in the way of physical objects that you would be able to see today that existed from 1894. What remains is the feeling. There is an air about the garden that has remained despite the physical changes that have happened over time. So this is the current location of the drum bridge. The carpenters, the gardeners, the craftsmen that physically build spaces like this, their names usually get lost over the folds of time, but we know the name Nakatani because a descendant of Shinshichi Nakatani, Katz Nakatani, who now lives in Southern California, has come up and attended our park commission meetings regularly to make sure that his ancestor has been honored.
The story of the Hagiwara family here at the Tea Garden is also one of systemic racism in California. Following the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, Japanese American families on the West Coast were relocated to parts of interior North America. The Hagiwara family were forcibly removed to Tanforan Assembly Center. That's where the Tanforan Mall is today, to give you some points of reference. They wouldn't return to San Francisco until after October 1945. So after the Hagiwaras were removed, the word Japanese was completely removed from the tea garden's name. It was referred to as just simply tea garden, sometimes Oriental tea garden. The Hagiwara's home that they had built and lived in for so many years was immediately demolished on this site and replaced by this sunken garden designed by Julius Gerard. When the family returned to San Francisco in the 1950s, they actually sold many of their possessions at auction, and they used the proceeds for that, at least part of it, to buy a home in the Richmond district, where the family still lives today. After a peace treaty was signed with Japan here in San Francisco in 1951, and it was implemented in 1952, park commissioners restored the Japanese tea garden name, and various landscape features were installed around the tea garden, signifying our new unity with Japan. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Steven Pitsenbarger, who's going to tell you more about these interesting landscape features.
This is the Karisansui, which literally means dry landscape garden, designed by Nagao Sakurai in 1953. And this part of the garden was my favorite part of the garden long before I had any idea I would end up working here. I grew up in San Francisco and would visit the Japanese tea garden like so many children in San Francisco. And I admired the peaceful feeling here in this part of the garden. Now, as an adult and someone who studied Japanese gardens, I appreciate the strong design. So if you're looking at it here, the tall stones on the left feel like a waterfall going into this body of water that then flows off into the stream off to the right. And the two islands in the middle represent turtles. Turtles and cranes are motifs that are oft repeated in Japanese gardens, and especially in relation to water. So if you see a pond, the shape of a turtle or the shape of a crane is a very common shape that you'll see. So I'm standing in front of the Lantern of Peace. This came into the garden after the signing of the peace treaty in 1951 between Japan and the Allied nations. The children of Japan saved up money and purchased this lantern and donated it to the United States as an everlasting symbol of peace. It, of course, came to San Francisco because this is where the treaty was signed, and then San Francisco thought, where are we going to put a Japanese lantern other than the Japanese tea garden? So this part of the garden has, to me, a fascinating story. When the Hagiwaras were informed that they had to go to internment camps in 1942, they tried to make arrangements for as many of their possessions as they could. In that collection was a collection of trees, potted plants. The collection of plants got sold to a Japanese nursery in the East Bay, Nobu Kawabata. He bought those trees as a collection and then sold them as a collection to Dr. Hugh Fraser and his wife Audrey Fraser. When she passed away in 1963, she'd written in her will that she wanted the trees to come back to the garden, and so the hillside behind me, complete with the waterfall, the boulders, many of the small trees, that is part of that collection. That went from the Hagiwaras to the Frasers and then back to the garden.
In 1974, a plaque designed by local sculptor Ruth Asawa was installed in the garden. And also installed at the same time were little froggies designed by Asawa. You can see one here, here, over there, and then my favorite one peeking out right here.
Okay, the building that I'm standing in front of now is what we refer to as the Temple Gate. The Temple Gate is under renovation. You can see all the blue tape and the primer on it. It's in the process of getting painted. We are restoring the Temple Gate and we are restoring the pagoda. The pagoda and the Temple Gate, which stand pretty close to each other now, also stood next to each other at the PPIE. They were both inside the Palace of Food Products in a display that was displaying sake, beer, ginger, and peanuts. The original version of the Temple Gate was falling apart in the 70s and 80s. It was torn down and replaced in 1985, but now it's getting painted again. So hopefully the structure will stand for many generations to come. So this is the structure, the scaffold and the shrink wrap around the pagoda. The shingles will be replaced, it'll be stabilized, and then it'll get painted and it'll look brand new again. And we are still in the process of raising funds for this entire project. So if you want to be a part of that effort, you can join the San Francisco Recreation and Park Department, the Parks Alliance, and the Friends of the Japanese Tea Garden by going to saveourpagoda.com. This is our Buddha here. This was cast in 1790 in Japan. It ended up in San Francisco as part of the Gump's department store. And then Gump's donated it to Rec and Park, and in 1949 it made its way into the Japanese tea garden. Some of my favorite pictures of this statue, there's a woman with hair about this high. Then I've got another picture of the band, the Doors, all sitting on the Buddha. If you're part of the public, don't sit on Buddha. No, it's not good.
Well, this feels like the right place to stop. We're right next to the George Turner Marsh plaque as well, so a fitting end to our story today. Steven Pitsenbarger, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been great having you here, Nicole. I enjoyed it too.
So the next time you're in Golden Gate Park, if it's a Wednesday through a Sunday, 9 a.m. to 5:45 p.m., make sure to stop in and track down Steven Pitsenbarger. I'm Nicole Meldahl. This has been another Western Neighborhoods Project History Moment brought to you by Joey Yee. We'll see you on the next one.